The biggest motivator for my interest in checking out the 2011 Aquaman series was author Geoff Johns. He had already cemented his place in DC history by salvaging the character of Green Lantern Hal Jordan and by breathing new life into that franchise. He also brought back the original Modern Flash, Barry Allen, and it was actually the Flashpoint event that spun out of that book that had just blown up the DC universe, leading to the New 52. Leading further to this new volume of Aquaman. Whatever Geoff Johns wrote, he made the single most important thing in the room. I wasn't about to miss out on what he would do with Aquaman. But there was also a very simple secondary motivator for myself. And it's just, I am fascinated by life underwater. Blame The Little Mermaid, blame the underwater scene in the Transformers the movie, blame Namor over at Marvel Comics. I don't know where it came from, but I like swimming, and I like life underwater. The mystery of the deeps, the strange shapes of sea life, and the seemingly unending possibilities of life down there. It's beautiful, it's terrifying, it's magical, it's strange and wondrous and dangerous. It feels like anything can happen underwater. And for a kid with an active imagination, that's amazingly fertile ground. I ate up stories about Atlantis and built up my own theories and ideas around it. When I stumbled into the world of comics and found characters like Namor the Submariner and Aquaman, I was always intrigued by them, but they never quite clicked for me. That didn't stop me from trying them over and over as the years went on, though. Combine that natural interest with the prestige of an author like Geoff Johns, and the solid artistic team of Ivan Reis, Joe Prado, and Rod Reis, and I had to check it out. Our story starts at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. These are the kind of depths where there is no light. Thanks to the magic of comics, we can just barely see the rocky ground, covered in a nutrient-rich ash. We can also see a massive crack in the ground from which volcanic clouds float up. There is no light. There is no sound. But there is movement. A humanoid form emerges from the cloud. Its four-fingered hand is thin and bony, the fingers connected by webbing. The mouth is an open pit filled with thin, long teeth. The place where the eyes is completely black, as dark as the ocean around it. The top of its head is a translucent material, allowing the brain matter to just barely be seen. The coloring makes it seem like the skin is also bioluminescent, just bright enough to highlight the texture of the creature. Whatever this thing is, it isn't alone. More of these creatures emerge. As they do, they start to speak to one another. Their word balloons are rough, colored green, and the text inside of it is unintelligible. Thankfully, a translation is provided. These creatures are surprised to find that the above does exist. But they're also confused about where to go next. One of them looks away from the sea floor. They go up. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 26.2, Aquaman, Part of Our World. So that's a nice, scary, ominous opening. Scary monsters emerge from the dark, and, they look great as far as scary monsters go. They are super creepy, clearly meat-eaters, and right away they feel like an incoming threat. We also have Aquaman fighting them on the cover, so yeah, these guys ain't good news. From there we jump to Boston, Massachusetts, and we join a police pursuit. 3 men in black masks, armed with guns, are flying through the streets inside of a stolen armored car. At least 2 police cars are in pursuit. Things here seem really intense. And then a figure lands in the road. Aquaman, wearing his golden armor and green pants, stands in the middle of the road. A golden trident rests comfortably in one hand, and his expression is pretty grave. He honestly looks heroic AF. but no one reacts to his presence here with any kind of respect. In the stolen car, the criminals actually laugh. Is that Aquaman? What's he gonna do? Tuna them to death? Over in the police cars, they groan as well. They aren't near the ocean. There is no fish around. What is this guy doing here? The criminals gun it, intending to run him down. Aquaman shifts his stance, pointing his trident at the oncoming car and planting his feet. Then he stabs his weapon at the grill of the vehicle. Using his super strength, he flips the car over his head and slams it down on its hood. Aquaman then waits a moment, and one of the men exits the car. He starts to aim his gun, and Aquaman simply says to put the gun away. Naturally, the guy doesn't, and he opens fire. Most of the bullets bounce off of Aquaman's trident or his armor, but one of them does manage to hit his forehead. It breaks the skin, but just barely. When it does, Aquaman's mood seems to shift. He grabs the gunman and hurls him right into the windshield of a police car. Not a smart move, man. The police exit the car and ask what we are all wondering, Aquaman? WTF are you doing here? But, more politely. Aquaman responds that he heard the car sirens from the harbor. Thought he could help. One of the men asks him if he needs a glass of water, and the look on Aquaman's face is priceless. Grade A side eye. With a quiet dignity, he just says, no. And then he jumps away. The cops sigh. Oh, I can't believe we just got upstaged by Aquaman. Yeah, another says. The boys at the station are never going to let us live this down. Author Geoff Johns does 3 major things with this scene. The first is that he establishes what Aquaman can exactly do. He can, pardon the theft, Superman, leap tall buildings in a single bound, which means that he cannot fly. He is bulletproof, but not invulnerable. He did take damage. But we also know that he is super strong, able to stand his ground against a speeding truck lifted up over his head, and throw a human man with a single arm. We also see that he does not need water in order to exist on dry land, or to have superpowers, as demonstrated by the cop asking if he needed a glass of water. Johns is using the scene to give us the ground rules for what it means to be Aquaman. He is also setting up how the world, and by extension, how the audience, views the character. Neither the police or the criminals take Aquaman seriously. The cops see him as useless initially, and when he stops the criminals, they're more afraid of being shown up by him than failing to catch the criminals. They aren't thankful for his help, they aren't impressed by his actions, they aren't newborn fans of his. They're embarrassed. This demonstrates that the general day-to-day people of the DC universe do think that Aquaman is a joke, just like the real world general populace does, or did, at least in 2011. The final thing that Johns does is establish quite a bit of who Aquaman is as a person and how he operates as a superhero. Because here's the thing, I have read this scene before, or at least a scene very much like it. I have seen Spider-Man do this kind of thing like a dozen times. I can perfectly see him landing on that speeding car, jokingly going, "Hey guys, where are we off to in such a rush?" Then there would be a quick fight scene, Spidey would web the street or the tires or something, he would catch the truck, web up the criminals, say a few puns, wave at the police, and then swing on out of there. Maybe, he would stop to take a picture of himself with his camera, but Aquaman? He doesn't do any of that. He lands, he stops the criminals, he leaves. In the entire 9 pages of comic that this scene was, he says 12 words total. Aquaman is not a funny guy. He is not very personable. He kind of seems uncomfortable with the entire situation, like he doesn't really know what to do. Or he seems kind of annoyed, I suppose, like the whole thing might be beneath him. Superman, as a character, would have been thanked for intervening. He would have had some kind words for the policemen involved. Aquaman just glares at one of them and then leaves. And I kind of love it. There's a distance, right, between Aquaman and the rest of human society being demonstrated here. This idea gets further explored in the next scene, as we follow Aquaman to a small roadside diner for some lunch. Johns doesn't tell us exactly where we are, but we are on the side of the road overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The diner has either fake fish plastered all over the walls or notable catches, along with other seagoing accoutrements. You know, lifesavers, photographs of catches, that kind of thing. It's a pretty bustling day when Aquaman strolls in, looking as out of place as a fish out of water. And everybody in the diner who is there is flabbergasted by this. Even the staff, who are horrified to realize all of a sudden that they work in a seafood restaurant. They watch him sit down, golden trident by his side, and are just like, what am I supposed to do now? One of the men pushes the waitress forward. Go on, see what he wants. So she does. She babbles a little bit when she gets to the table, nervous to be around a superhero, much less, the only water-based one that anyone knows about. But Aquaman remains calm, and he's actually pretty friendly throughout. He does politely order the fish and chips, and she leaves to put in his order. A guy in the booth behind Aquaman comments to him that he can't have the fish and chips. That's like cannibalism, right? Or maybe eating your friends. He talks to fish, come on, man. The side eye, fantastic as it is back. Aquaman replies that he does not talk to fish. Their brains are not developed enough to actually hold a conversation. He tells them what to do via a telepathic push. Fish, squids, sharks, they're all the same. There's no communication, it's just do this, please. Except for dolphins. Dolphins are different. Another guy actually sits down at Aquaman's booth, which is more than a bit presumptuous to me. Again, Aquaman has way more patience than I would have had with this situation, and the dude says that he has a blog, and he wants to ask Aquaman a few questions. Like, what's with the orange shirt and trident? How do you make a living if you don't have a job? And why did you come to this restaurant specifically? We see Aquaman's mind drift back to when he was a kid. We see him at the diner, in this very booth, with his father. Your human father, right? Your mom was the queen of Atlantis, assuming that Atlantis is real, the human asks. Atlantis is real, Aquaman says. Yeah, well, you might be the only one who believes it, the guy replies. Is that where the red-headed mermaid he's dating comes from? I heard that she's stronger than Wonder Woman. Is that true? Finally, Aquaman has had enough of this guy. Look, man, he says, I'm just here to have some food. The guy raises his hands. Okay, one last question, no big deal. Just, what is it like, to be Aquaman? They've all seen the jokes, they've all seen the skits. How does it feel to be a punchline, he asks. To be a laughingstock? How does it feel to be no one's favorite superhero? Aquaman doesn't look away from the man, but he does grab his trident. It rings slightly as he touches it. And then he gets up and leaves. As Aquaman passes the waitress who has his food, he tells her to keep the change. She runs to catch up with him outside. But what is she supposed to do with these? In her fingers are 2 golden coins. Aquaman looks over his shoulder. Put your kids through college. This scene reinforces what we saw in the opening scene, that no one in the general public really gets Aquaman. Nobody really knows how his powers work, whether Atlantis is even real or not, or how he pays his bills. These are the basics, and nobody has any idea. And the character honestly does little to explain to those who ask him the questions, although we, as the audience, are given answers. The talk-to-fish thing is a really good power to have some rules established for, as it is easily perhaps his most famous power, and I particularly like the scientific explanation behind it. But this also demonstrates that fish aren't friends to Aquaman. They're just fish. They are living creatures, yes, but they are still a food source to be eaten. The dolphin comment that they're special, I think, is actually a weird continuity throwback. The Golden Age version of Aquaman actually spoke dolphin language specifically. Not even just spoke to fish, but spoke to dolphins in their own language. It was specifically different from talking to any other sea animal. It is probably also a nod to the modern age idea that dolphins are able to communicate with each other. They have some kind of language, it's just one that humans can barely comprehend. When asked about paying his bills, we do see a memory of Aquaman collecting some golden coins from a pirate chest on a beach. It's hard to tell if he is placing them there after collecting them from the seafloor, or if he is taking the coins out of the chest because that's where he keeps them all the time. But it explains why he gets away with not having a job, and it's a cute idea. It makes a lot of sense and feels pretty natural. I actually remember Namor doing something similar in the 1992 volume of his own comic. And then, of course, we get to see why he is here at this restaurant specifically. And it's for the most human reason of all. Because of his father, and the memories that Arthur has of his childhood. Johns has portrayed Aquaman as fairly aloof and distant so far. Hell, outside of me saying it, Johns hasn't even given us Aquaman's human name yet. During this scene, he is answering questions patiently, but he also seems kinda bothered by everything, right? He wants to eat lunch and be left alone. But seeing this quiet memory and the kindness that he shows to the waitress shows us that Aquaman, at his heart, is a good guy. He cares for people, and he is human, even if he doesn't get to fit in and have a quiet lunch. That same sense of distance that existed between Aquaman and the police exists between Aquaman and the common man, too. But it also doesn't stop him from trying to help people. It makes him feel oddly put on, actually. It seems like everybody wants something from him, and even when he gives freely, volunteering to help the police, nobody appreciates it. From that booth in the restaurant, we now look out over the ocean. As the shoreline wraps around, we can see a lighthouse standing on a cliff. As the sun sets and darkness settles over the water, we move to Amnesty Bay. The lighthouse that we saw earlier is lit, a tall, proud beacon in the night. Aquaman stands atop the rocks below it as waves crash into them. As he stares into the night, he remembers the words of his father. When he was a child, they sat on these very same stones, watching ships sail by. Little Arthur asked his dad why he wanted to be a lighthouse keeper, when he could be the captain of his own ship instead. And Tom Curry replied that, yeah, he could be a captain, but someone has to stay on shore and help those captains. Someone has to watch out for them, and it's his responsibility. A woman's voice calls for Arthur. Mara, Arthur's lover, wraps her arms around his torso from behind. She's wearing a green robe which flutters in the powerful wind. Her long red hair does the same. She warns him that it's getting late. He should come to bed. Arthur tells her that he's made a decision. He was 13 when people from Atlantis rose from these very waters to try to kill him. They wanted him dead because of who his father was, because of who he was. Mara says that she knows this. She also knows that he survived the attempt, and he has saved Atlantis time and time again since that happened. They might have feared or hated him back then, but he has been their king ever since. He is their leader. Arthur replies that he was their leader, but he was never one of them. And he's never wanted to be, honestly. He didn't ask for that responsibility. So you know what? Floop them. He wants to make a life up here. He isn't going to go back to Atlantis. Let them find a new king. Mara smiles, and together they can build a new life. Arthur scoops her up, and they kiss. Out at sea, a small fishing boat rests on the water. 4 men are sitting patiently, but they haven't had any luck catching anything so far. One of them complains that he doesn't understand it. It's not like the waters here are overfished. Maybe they can smell your boots, another jokes. Suddenly, there's a tug on the guy's line. He reels back, trying to pull the fish in, but he is suddenly pulled over the side of the boat. The other men react quickly, grabbing a flotation device to throw for him, but when they scan the water, they don't see him. They keep searching, and then the guy's hat suddenly surfaces in a bubble of blood. One of those creatures from the start of the issue also surfaces in the blood. And then so does another. And another. I count at least 10 of the creatures surrounding the boat. The camera focuses on one of them, and it looks at the humans. There's food up here, it says. And the issue ends. The ending scene is fine, beginning to connect our opening scene through Aquaman's story here to the end. These bottom feeders are going to start eating surface dwellers, and Aquaman has decided to stay on the surface. Conflict seems inevitable, and honestly, that's fine. What confuses me, though, is why Arthur made the decision that he did. The final scene shows him remembering the words of his father, that he could be a ship's captain, but he would rather run the lighthouse and protect those boats. That's fine. Arthur's decision actually mirrors this. He could be the king of Atlantis, but he would rather defend people from the threats of the world. That's also fine. But why? Why is that what he chooses? Johns has just spent this entire issue showing us just how underappreciated Aquaman is by the surface world. The authorities don't think he's useful, criminals don't fear him, and the normal people around him don't understand anything about his life. Why protect these people instead of the people of Atlantis? He is no more welcome on the surface than he is down there. The scene with Arthur's father is the key. Tom Curry could have been a ship's captain, just like Arthur could be the king of Atlantis. But Tom chose the responsibility of defending those ships from harm as the keeper of a lighthouse. Arthur denying the kingship of Atlantis is an abdication of responsibility. It's hard, thankless work, and as Arthur says to Mera, he's never fit in with the rest of the Atlanteans, so why should he bother being a part of their culture? I do think that this is a good story decision. Power and responsibility, well, I mean, that's a comic book's classic. And denial of responsibility leads to a problem that the hero must inevitably fix. Peter Parker fails to stop a burglar, that burglar kills Uncle Ben, Peter swears to defend the innocent as Spider-Man, bing bang boom, you got it. Arthur Curry chooses to leave the seas behind, and the threat of hungry monsters makes its way to the surface, threatening the lives of the very people that he has now chosen to defend. Just when Aquaman tried to get out of the water, they're going to pull him right back in. The problem that I have with that decision, though, is that Johns has spent this whole issue demonstrating that the surface world treats Aquaman just as badly as the water world does. He is literally told to his face that he is a joke. So why does he bother with this? Why defend anybody at all? Why not just mind the lighthouse and live a normal life with Mera? This story would make more sense to me if Arthur told Mera that he was done being a superhero specifically, but he didn't. He said he's done being a king. So I do think that author Geoff Johns is missing a little bit of a story beat here. Things are just a little bit off. It's not terrible, but it's noticeable. Artistically, this issue is gorgeous. Ivan Reis, Joe Prado, and Rod Reis are a great team. Penciler Ivan Reis has a fairly realistic, great superheroic style. His facial expressions in particular are great. Every grimace, every scowl that Aquaman does comes through perfectly. But he still looks handsome. He's that perfectly muscular type of hero with his detailed, scaled shirt and complicated trident. The coloring of the book is bright and shining, the inks are tight and detailed. But the real-world city and car chase also look right. The restaurant feels like crowded and overpopulated to me, filled with knickknacks and onlookers, and everything just blends together really well. Reis's artwork helps to ground the book, and it adds a level of seriousness to Aquaman's story. The creative team, in particular, is taking this character seriously, and it all works, which then makes me, as a reader, especially a new reader, take the story seriously as well. I mentioned before that the cover for issue 1 has Aquaman fighting these creatures, heralding their threat. Aquaman is positioned to be pointing his trident at the camera, towards the audience, and it's dynamic and it looks good. But then you get issue 2, and the cover is a straight-on facial shot of one of the creatures. We can see nothing else beyond that. In the creature's eyes, though, is a reflection of Aquaman. It is the same image of Aquaman as the cover for issue 1, pairing the two of these covers together. And I know it's a small thing, But that's awesome. I love that. I will always love that kind of thing. I love when the covers help to tell the story of the comic book too. That's such an unnecessary feature these days, especially with variant covers being such a huge part of the industry. Like, nobody asked for these covers to be paired together but separate, but they did it, and the art team gave it to us anyways, and I love them for it. That kind of thing just tickles me. I love it. It's awesome. So anyway, issue 2 picks up right where we left off with issue 1. The creatures begin to climb on board the boat, hungering for more man flesh. One of the men manages to pull a flare gun from the safety box, and he fires it, point blank, into the mouth of one of the creatures. It falls back, its jaw ruined, but more of them climb on board. One of the creatures stands taller than all the rest. Spines jut from its jaw, pointed backwards. Slits on its shoulders and arms show pink flesh underneath. Maybe they're cuts, maybe they're gills. It's kind of hard to tell. I would guess that they're gills, but it's just a little difficult to tell. The big one makes a sound, holding its ground before the threat of these men. One of the men stammers out, "What do you want?" The big one leans in. In its garbled speech, it replies, "Food." And then it covers the guy in spit. The other creatures acknowledge that he is marking that human as his food specifically. The big one then pounces on the man and begins feeding in earnest. One of the creatures, kept from eating, sees lights off in the distance. It wonders what they are. And is there more food there? The big creature lifts its head. More food? The lights are the docks of the nearby town. We then move to those docks, and we see an excited kid jumping up and down as he spots his father's returning boat. And it's coming back. The image of the kid then morphs into a photograph of Arthur when he was a child skiing. This blows Mara's mind as they flip through the photo album. So wait, you're telling me that surface dwellers strap pieces of wood to their feet so that they can slide on frozen water? That sounds terrible, she teases. When can we try it? Arthur smiles at her enthusiasm, assuring her that they do not have to go skiing. But she wants to. The whole idea of them living on the surface is to try new things together, to start a new life. So she wants to do as many things as she possibly can with him. She wants to learn more about him. Like here, she points to a photo of young Arthur, his father Tom, and an Asian man. "Who is this with you and your father?" she asks. Arthur looks pained when he says that it shouldn't be in there. There's suddenly a knock at the door. Arthur opens it, and he is shirtless, by the way, in nothing but sweatpants, and he finds a police officer standing there. "Well, you look like Aquaman," the cop says, "but it's kind of hard to tell without the orange shirt." "It's scale armor," Arthur replies. "What do you need?" This guy is Wilson, the sheriff of Beach Rock. There's something going on, and he thought that Aquaman could help, so he has been driving up and down the coast for hours. And here, finally, Wilson spots Mara. Wait, is that Aquaman? Wilson thought she was a mermaid. Or is that only when she's in the water? Is that how it works? Her name is Mara, Arthur says, and she then demonstrates her powers. Mara can control water, and she creates a mermaid out of ambient moisture in the air. If you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, the character of Katara, how she's able to move water and shape it, it's basically what Mara does. The display is beautiful and a little bit terrifying. Wilson is amazed by it. "So," Aquaman says, "can we help you?" "Oh, right," Wilson replies. "So some sea monsters attacked Beach Rock last night? You can talk to sea life, right?" We then hard cut to the dock that we saw earlier in the issue. The area is swarming with police, with Coast Guard, with damage and blood. Helicopters scan the water, boats search the water level with spotlights and divers. The boat that we saw the creatures attack has been rammed into the dock without a care. As Aquaman and Mara walk into the scene, Arthur notes that the Navy is there too. They've called in a lot of help. Another officer starts to yell at Wilson, berating him for taking off when they need all the hands they can get, and... Wait, is that Aquaman and Aquawoman? Her name is Mara. And who are you? Turns out that Wilson lied. He is not the sheriff at all. He's just a deputy. This guy is the sheriff, and he isn't thrilled to have Aquaman here. Wilson defends the idea, though. Aquaman saved his sister when that cruise ship sank last year. He knows that he can be helpful. The sheriff continues to argue no, but by now, neither Aquaman or Mara are listening. They march past the sheriff to the water's edge. Mara tells Arthur that these people should be bowing before him. He argues that he isn't a king up here, Mara. That's not what they do. Mara offers to teach the humans some respect. But Aquaman doesn't respond to that idea. Instead, he stands on the pier, looking out into the black water, and he concentrates. For 3 panels, he attempts to contact the nearby sea life, but he gets no response. There is nothing out there. Not a single fish, which is highly unlikely. Why would there be no fish at all, he wonders. One of the divers pushes a body up onto the pier. They found something. As the men on the pier unwrap the cloth used to haul the object up, they are vaguely horrified. It's some kind of cocoon. In the back of his mind, Aquaman hears a whisper. It's half guttural, half understandable. It is a single word. Food. He whips around, readying his trident for a fight. Picking up on his cues, Mara summons a ball of water to hand to use as a weapon. Aquaman then orders the humans to get to shore. There's still something in the boat. A dozen of the creatures suddenly explode from the boat. The humans with guns open fire, but it does little to slow the horde. Neither Aquaman or Mara recognize the creatures, but they dive into the fight anyway. Mara smacks them aside with walls of water and super strength enhanced punches. She literally actually punches one of their jaws off, like right off of his face. Attack us like monsters, she says. Then we'll treat you like monsters. As the combat goes on, we see Aquaman and Mara being separated. Thin teeth shatter against Aquaman's armor. Faces and hands are cut as he swings his trident defensively, until one hand stops it. The big creature holds the trident with ease. It looks at Aquaman, and he looks back. What are you? Then the big one spits up on him again, marking him as his food. The big creature announces that this food, comes to the trench. And that's how the issue ends. If you couldn't guess, author Geoff Johns is a master of decompressed storytelling. Decompressed storytelling is a method of writing in which the author will slow down the overall pace of a story, allowing for greater focus on character moments or really cool action scenes. Older comics, published between the 40s to the 80s, depending on which title you were reading, would often cram a lot of stuff into a single issue. The first issue where the Vision appeared, Ultron introduced him as in, I just built this guy and he's going to help me destroy the Avengers. He then unleashed him on the Avengers and they fought. The Vision turned on Ultron, having a complete 180 in his character personality, and they managed to beat Ultron. You know, that is a lot of glossed over character work for a single comic book. So in the early 2000s, when comic companies needed to compete against manga in the bookstore sales charts, they changed how many of their comics were written. Single-issue stories were now stretched to 4 or even 6-issue story arcs. These arcs could then be collected in trade paperbacks and sold in bookstores. Some authors never made the switch at all, some made the switch but it took some time to get used to it, and others just excelled at it. And Geoff Johns crushed it. This particular issue is incredibly slow to read. We are now 2 issues into Aquaman, and he has barely encountered our first big threat, and we honestly still don't know a lot about the personal aspect of this character or his history. But Johns is taking the time to explore who Aquaman is as a person, firmly establishing that idea for, hopefully, a new generation of fans with this relaunch. Most of the work done here is an extension of what we saw in the first issue. No one understands Aquaman, and even fewer people understand Mara at all. But in Deputy Wilson, we do at least see someone who actually respects Aquaman, who believes that he can genuinely help. And the writing in Arthur is pretty confident, I think. He remains aloof and distant in all of his non-personal interactions, but he still wants to help. When the sheriff tries to tell him to go away, he just outright ignores that order. Aquaman might not expect others to respect him, but he still has the bearing of someone who is used to being listened to, you know? You can take the king out of the kingdom, but it seems you can't take being a king away from the king. I also really like the moment when he uses his telepathic fish power and comes up dry. The creatures from the trench are stated to be here looking for food. That's pretty much the only thing we know about them. So the empty bay indicates that they have either eaten everything under the water, or the fish all fled the scene in an attempt to escape. That is some super subtle storytelling, demonstrating what the trench can do and the kind of threat that they present, but it also fits in perfectly with everything that we have seen in the comics so far. Mara gets a bit more screen time in this issue as her own character, which is great, but she's still pretty much just a supporting cast member for Arthur. She and Arthur do feel very close, but there also seems to be a degree of newness to the relationship. The scene with the photo album would indicate that there are parts of Arthur's life that she still doesn't know about yet, but you gotta give her credit because she is eager to learn. It also shows us that there are things that Arthur isn't telling her, so that's being set up for exploration further as well. I would like to point out that the photos appear to be drawn by personal favorite artist Jim Chung. There is no credit for him in the issue, but I swear to Stan Lee, that's Jim Chung's artwork. Who is that Asian man shown there? Well, we'll come back to that later. Johns is establishing the character's importance in Arthur's life here in order to draw him back into the narrative later on. We see him in old family photos, and they are clearly close, but something has happened since then, causing Arthur to dislike him. I also like the shared responses between Arthur and Mara. Whenever someone calls Mara Aquawoman, Arthur is the one who corrects them. Mara never does. But when someone says something mean or incorrect about Arthur, Mara is the one who doesn't hesitate to defend him. Arthur never does. It's a cool balance between the two of them, demonstrating their differences in their backgrounds. Mara knows that Arthur is the former king of Atlantis, and she respects that even if he isn't the king anymore. The surface world doesn't even think that Atlantis is real. As far as they're concerned, this guy's just crazy. We also see an interesting brutality to Mara here. When she tells the creatures that if they attack like monsters, then they'll be fought back as monsters, she's kind of saying it as just a blanket response, right? It's just a thing said in a fight. But I can't help but wonder, does that apply to anyone who threatens them? Like, let's say a close-minded guy tried to attack Mara and Arthur because they're fish people. Would she also punch his jaw off? And then we see Aquaman cutting the creatures in the fight. And, suddenly this doesn't feel like a superhero fight. It's not a superhero fight, right? This isn't hero stopping an attack with as few casualties as possible, protecting the sanctity of life no matter where they look. This feels more like the Lord of the Rings when trolls are being killed. This makes the issue read overall as more realistic, again, fitting that serious tone of the book. It grounds all of the action in the book, actually. Everybody on the dock is gone, and I thought that those people were just plain eaten, and then the trench hid back in their boat. In most comics, that kind of cold-blooded storytelling wouldn't happen, right? The trench would have kidnapped the humans or held them hostage or something, and Aquaman would have needed to take action to bring them all back safely. But that just might not be the case here. Those people could actually be dead. And the only reason that I'm even willing to entertain that idea is because this book has played everything up to this point so seriously. The discovery of the cocoon does lead me to think that the humans have probably just been captured, though, and, well, maybe harvested is the right word, more than captured. But I would guess that Aquaman's probably still going to save a whole bunch of people before the end of the story, because that's comic books, right? I guess we'll see as we go on. Next week, Aquaman and Mara begin looking for answers about these strange creatures. This brings them to a man who once tried to kill Arthur and sends them to the depths of the ocean. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown, episode 26.3 of Aquaman, The Trench. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.